on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
People constantly say that all wild hogs are inedible. That shakes me to the core.
It seems like America's having to reckon with the hog issue and figure out some solutions. Part of it has been bringing them into this USDA inspections facilities and then actually getting them into the food supply.
Once they hit sexual maturity at 5 or 6 months, there's a short gestation period, and then they have a 23-day break after that before they'll probably be bred again.
Pork fat is like one of the most prized culinary lipids there is. That's the whole hydrogenation process is really about trying to make fake lard.
And for things like pies and cookies and cakes and tortillas and tamales, that's the best fat out there.
The first time I shot a big hog, I wanted to love this guy. He just stunk so bad.
We're not going to eat our way out of this problem. But every dead one that's on the ground has then become a resource. And let's figure out something to do with it.
Episode 171 of the WildFed podcast, The HogFather with Jesse Griffiths, is brought to you by Tshirt. Right now, it's Tshirt annual colostrum sale. This is our biggest sales event of the year and our clients' most favorite. All colostrum products are 20% off until March 15th with the coupon code OPTIMIZE. I use a third of a cup of colostrum daily in my blended drinks, and I have for years. I consider it one of the most sophisticated nutritional supplements in existence for its ability to improve the immune system, restore the lining of the gut, improve lean muscle mass, repair tissue, and so much more. It's a favorite amongst athletes, bodybuilders, longevity experts, and for anyone trying to repair their body from the inside out. If you're a serious user or you're ready to start using it seriously, I highly recommend the 1 kilo or even better, the 2 kilo container. I call that 2 kilo container the Darth Vader helmet since it comes in a huge black tub that reminds me of Mr. Vader's helmet. Also, give a try to our naturally flavored colostrum powders as well. Chocolate with real cacao, vanilla with real vanilla bean extract, and strawberry with real strawberry juice. These aren't the fake flavors you're so used to in most supplements today. Go to SirThrival.com to see the entire lineup of health promoting supplements and use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for 20% off all colostrum products. Tshirt. Why just survive when you can thrive? Do you need an antidote to the metaverse? We just launched our newest t-shirt design over at wild-fed.com. It features our antidote to the metaverse tagline on the chest, a WildFed badge on the sleeve, and 2 tarot-style cards juxtaposed on the back, one modeled on the tarot card known as the Fool, who's wearing an Oculus and absent-mindedly walking off the roof of a building with a bag of fast food in one hand and a cell phone in the other. Next to it is a card based on the Magician, who's juggling 4 implements, a fishing rod, a rifle, a trap, and a foraging basket. It represents our belief that a life that includes the outdoors inoculates you against believing that an artificial experience of life could ever replace a natural one. You see, for us, being wild-fed, hunting, fishing, and foraging is about a lot more than just getting our groceries. It's an antidote to the metaverse, an act of rebellion against the transhuman agenda that is leading humanity to abandon the natural world in favor of wearing screens over their eyes to live in a virtual one. We choose the natural over the artificial. We choose an antidote to the metaverse. We choose to be fed by the wild. Check out our new shirt at wild-fed.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. If anyone in America is deserving of the illustrious title of HogFather, it's Jesse Griffiths. He's a hunter, fisherman, cook, and co-owner of Dai Due Butcher Shop and Supper Club and New School of Traditional Cookery in Austin, Texas. He's also the author of Afield, a chef's guide to preparing and cooking wild game and fish, as well as his most recent publication, The Hog Book, a chef's guide to hunting, preparing, and cooking wild pigs. The Hog Book is one of the best species-specific how to hunt and cook books that have got in my library. Even if, like me, you live in a place without a feral hog population, you want to own this book. It's incredible, and I hope just the beginning in a long line of books to come. Jesse's a dynamic dude, and he gets up to a lot more than just hunting and cooking hogs, but as the leading voice on utilizing wild pigs for food, and not just a voice, he utilizes them extensively on the menu at his restaurant Dai Due, he's quickly becoming the hunting world's reference for turning this otherwise deleterious non-native species into excellent table fare. When it comes to management of these fecund mammals, Jesse is quick to point out that eating them is unlikely to ever be a total solution. They reproduce far too quickly, are far too intelligent, and just too well integrated into the landscape to eradicate, but eating them does provide us with an excellent source of quality wild protein, provides hunting opportunities to those trying to find an inroad into the world of hunting, and shifts the focus from purely adversarial to something more appreciative, or at least slightly more amicable. One of the things I love about his book is that rather than just giving a set of recipes, he keys the recipes out based on the size and sex of the hog you've got. Big old boars eat a lot different than pregnant sows, which are really different than younger piglets, something we'll get into in this interview. I also wanted to mention that as someone who, like me, started hunting later in life, it's incredible to see how he's impacted hunting culture here in the US. It's a reminder of the rapidly changing hunting demographic and that you don't have to have grown up hunting in order to develop the skills and culinary craft to feed yourself and educate the public. In fact, I think we've only just begun to see the legacy that Jesse's going to leave in the American hunting community. So it's my pleasure to have Jesse Griffiths on the podcast, especially given that this is one of our final episodes. From the start, it was my goal to curate conversations with important people in the wild food culture, and he certainly qualifies. I'm proud to have him in our lineup. If you haven't seen it already, go back to season 2 of the WildFed TV show. It's on myoutdoortv.com, and you can see the episode we made with him in Texas. And seriously, get yourself the Hog Book. You won't regret it. Jesse Griffiths, welcome to the show.
It's good to see you again, Daniel.
Yeah, likewise, man. Sitting here with a copy of your book, and I was just admiring. There's like an old woodcut or a sort of old sketch of Hernando de Soto with a quote under it that says, "It's my fault."
Yeah, that's not his quote. That's my quote. Yeah.
Added to that. Yeah, that's really funny, man. I kind of want to just sort of back us all the way to the beginning. I'll say, you and I got to work together last year for season 2 of WildFed down in Texas, or maybe that was almost 2 years ago now. And that was just amazing. And at that time, I had sort of come to see you as like the HogFather of the United States, And today I'm just thinking, like, what's the backstory and where did this all start for you? Because of course, you were on our show, but of course you've done Meat Eater a few times. You've been on Joe Rogan talking about this stuff. You've got the book on hogs, literally called the Hog Book. So, you've become deeply associated with not just hog hunting, but hog cookery. But what's the backstory, man? How did you come to be, author, restaurateur, TV personality, hunter, all this kind of stuff? Like, where did this all begin for you?
Well, that's a lot. I think that, in particular, through the lens of hogs, they have fascinated me for a long time. I became a hunter later in life. I was about 30 years old when I started hunting. I grew up fishing, and on the landscape here in Texas, hogs are kind of indelible. They're everywhere. They're just part of the hunting culture here. And I was a butcher in restaurants before I started hunting. So,
okay.
In particular, I knew how to butcher pigs, and so they were kind of comfortable. I knew where everything was on a hog carcass, and so I felt very comfortable with it. And I was also just obsessed with the fact that they're invasives and delicious. And so I think that you don't always get that kind of perfect storm of attributes, and so I think it's pretty cool. And then they're also very misunderstood. And so as we started to develop our business, which started off as just a kind of this roving dinner club in 2006. And then we started doing these educational weekends. They were hunting weekends where we'd go out and take people hunting and then teach them how to butcher and cook after that. And we started to really compile a lot of questions. And I like to say that I didn't really write that book as much as I answered 1,000 questions in that book. And that people were constantly curious about hogs, or they'd have a question, or there might just be some misinformation that they perpetrated, that I'm like, I know that's not right, that's, we can start with the statement that I've heard before. All wild hogs are inedible. Like, people will literally say that. to me. I'm like, I don't even know how to take that. That shakes me to the core. So I think that a combination of those things, the curiosity that our I'll call them constituents had, along with like the misinformation and kind of this historical or just generational misinformation about hogs, led me to try to approach it. And I think that it hadn't been done in a really concise way. And so over many years, I was able to just take all of those questions that people had and kind of put them together in one volume, and that became the Hog Book. But up until then, we'd been very focused on feral hogs as a resource. In my restaurant, Dai Due in Austin, we serve a lot of them. So we get them trapped and inspected, and we try to put a dent in them that way. We try to normalize them in the food system by serving them in a restaurant setting, and not just as like a kind of exotic meat. It's just like, that's like an everyday dinner item. We serve a lot of feral hog.
Yeah, it's kind of like a backbone on the menu, isn't it?
Certainly. We go through a lot of them. And so that's kind of the genesis of that. And, I'm afraid of getting typecast a little bit because I am interested in other things as well. I like to go fishing, and I like to pick blackberries, and I like to make pickles, and all those things. But yeah, hogs, it's a hot topic. And I think especially here in Texas, we hear a lot about them. But then I also know that there's a southward expansion of feral hogs from Canada that's happening right now. And, I'm joking with people, that like, I'm in Montana and I don't have hogs. And I'm like, let's check back in 5 years.
Yeah.
In Maine, it's just, it's almost a matter of time in a lot of places.
I'd welcome it up here, man. I gotta say, despite, I know that that's not a popular thing to say for folks who are dealing, agriculturally with them and things like that, but it is this opportunity that folks have in some states that I'm kind of envious of it a little bit, having to travel to do it, So, and to speaking to your book for a second, I wish I had a volume like this on every species I'm interested in. Because it's really thorough, and I love the way that you broke it down. The wild food literature doesn't have a lot of that, like I wish there was a blackberry book like this, and I wish there was a book about bluegills like this or whatever it is, unfortunately it's like kind of few and far between, but backing up. So you were a butcher by trade. How, when did you start cooking? Like, how does that whole thing to come together for you?
Well, I started, working in restaurants at a very young age. And I liked to work a lot when I was a kid, when I was in high school. And so I got into the hospitality industry almost by default. I didn't have any love for it when I got into it. But I soon just learned that that's my world. And I like the hospitality. I like cooking for people and serving people. I started out in the front of the house, bussing and things like that. And then around age 20, moved into the kitchen. And from there, here I'm still there. Never really did much of anything else, and eventually wound up at a restaurant here in Austin that was one of the first to do whole animal butchery. And so that was in the early 2000s, before it kind of became more in vogue.
Right.
And we were doing it, I think, for financial reasons. They were like, oh, a whole pig is that much? Let's do that. And so, but also fun and very educational, and kind of took a crash course on butchering, mostly hogs and some lambs and, some veal. And then we'd get other things in randomly. And so kind of learned how to do all that. Now, like I said, that was before I started hunting. So I had that background there, and, worked basically every position that you can work in a kitchen. I made pasta, I've done pastry, I've done bread, I've done plenty. I've done enough working the hotline, the service to last me a lifetime. And I'm retired from that.
Yeah. The way a whole hog comes to a restaurant versus the way a hog comes out of the field, it's so different. Could you describe that a little bit? Like when you would get a hog to butcher, a commercial hog, How would that come to the restaurant versus, when you're dealing with one maybe as a hunter? I know that it's not like you're out shooting hogs and bringing them to the restaurant. I know that's like a
Sure.
separate thing, but kind of describe the difference there, because I think when you're dealing with like something clean and septic and it's been, come through that commercial world, everything's like sort of perfect and it's like taking Legos apart, but then
Mm.
you get something out of the field and it's a little messy and there's some meat damage and there's like some
Mm.
stuff that looks like maroon jello floating around and you're trying to figure that out. It's like it's not quite as simple of a task sometimes, especially if you don't know the map. So yeah, could you describe that difference for people?
I think that's an incredible question. Well, first off, a hog in the field's going to have a big old hole poked in it. That's
Yeah.
like you said. But I think the real crux of this uh, kind of this, it's almost like it's a conundrum, is that a domestic hog comes in kind of perfect. And I think the word that I would most describe it as is consistent.
Hmm.
So it's going to have a good layer of fat on it. It's going to be of a certain size. It's going to be the size you ordered, probably,
Yeah, right.
and things like that. And so, I mean, I'll kind of back up for a second and say that I do these. I'll do a hog class. In fact, I did one last night. And what we'll do is we'll bring in 3 feral hogs for that class. And the way that I approximate exactly what you're talking about, the what you might encounter in the field, is that I order from our processor who traps these pigs, and he kills them under inspection, then brings them to us. They're stamped and ready to go, state inspected. He'll bring us these feral hogs, and he knows that I just want 3 hogs, and they can be of any size, any fat content. And I don't really care. All I want is 3 of the most different hogs that he has. And
Mm.
and then at the beginning of the class, I introduce myself and I'm like, listen, I haven't looked at these pigs. I don't know what we have. And by doing so, even in a class situation, what I'm trying to do is approximate what you would get in the wild, because you could have 2 pigs out of the same sounder, a family group, and one might have a 2-inch fat cap and one might have no fat on it whatsoever,
Uh-huh.
kind of depending on these individual hogs. And hogs are highly individualistic anarchists. They
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just they do whatever serves them the most at the time. And so I think that by doing so, I'm like, I'll say, okay, bring out the first hog. And the first one comes out. I'm like, oh, okay, that is a big, lean boar. The second one comes out, it's a fatty 35-pound carcass. The third one comes out, it's a very lean 50-pound carcass. I'm like, okay, well, the approaches that we're going to take to these 3 different hogs are this and that and that. And I'm like, and you have a way to kind of recreate the in the field situation where you're hunting and all of a sudden 3 pigs walk out and you're like, I'm going to take that one. You shoot that one, and it's not until you start to take the hide off that you have any inclination as to what that pig's going to look like. And it most certainly doesn't look like that domestic hog that we ordered, and it's just perfect. It's a large black red wattle cross, and it's just got marbling and fat, and
And does it have skin on? Like when you get that commercial hog, it's got skin, but its hair's been removed, or has it been scun?
Uh, for us at the restaurant, we always we don't get scalded hogs. We always buy skinned hogs because we just
Okay.
don't have enough use for the skin, and
Okay.
not to mention our processor doesn't have a scalding operation there, so
Hmm.
it's difficult for him. Now, if you're roasting hogs whole or you have a need for cuts, and this is speaking in purely for domestic or farm raised pork, if you don't have that need, it's you're also paying by the pound for that
Oh yeah.
skin,
Okay.
and it's
Right.
pretty heavy. So I tend
Right. Yeah.
to we just order it without. So we
Okay.
get
Got it.
skinned hogs in, and in the field, I mean, feral hogs are almost universally skinned. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
you'll hear of some crazy methods for getting the hair off. Some of which are effective, and some of which are downright gross.
Yeah.
So but I mean, there is a big difference, and I think that going back to your question, it really illuminates the issue that people have always had with cooking feral hogs, is that it's not a one size fits all deal. I had a client last weekend at one of our hunting classes with one shot, he killed 2 pigs. One was a big sow and one was a tiny piglet. And so the big sow probably weighed in at about, if I remember correctly, about 90 pounds. And she was very drawn down, meaning that she had been transferring all of the fat in her body into milk for the piglets. So she was very, very lean. And then the piglet, which we were describing as a 7x13, because when we cleaned the piglet and flattened it out for grilling, it was 7 inches by 13 inches. Um, so if you were to ask me what recipe are you going to cook these hogs with, I would just laugh, right? I've got one pig that'll fit in a shoebox and another one that's a very large pig, but also doesn't have any fat on it. And so the applications are very limited. Now, had we taken that sow 3 months prior, maybe when she was pregnant, and maybe there was more abundant food sources for her, she might have had a good fat cap on her and the story could have been completely different. So really what you're looking at is you need to convey to people that they need to ascertain what the attributes are for these individual hogs. It's really important to not go in and be like, oh, hey, I'm going to make carnitas out of the next hog I shoot. And I would be like, well, why don't you look at the next hog you shoot first? You might be perfectly able to do that. Or you might have to turn the whole thing into sausage because it's just so incredibly lean, or this or that. I mean, there's a lot of factors. And so over the years, we really identified that as being one of the key factors in helping people along, is to try to help them figure out what their particular hog, the hog in front of them, is going to be the most worthwhile in preparation. So like how do we get people, how do we create a very simple system? And that's what we kind of formulated over the years, was this like 4 size approach of a small pig, a medium pig, a large boar, and a large sow. And we're using a lot of generalizations there, but most small pigs are very similar. Most medium pigs are very similar. Most large sows are fatty, and you can do quite a bit with them. And most large boars tend to run a little bit lean and maybe stronger in flavor. I mean, it's abject generalizations right here, but it works. And so if you kind of use that as a jumping off point, then I think that you can have a lot more success in the kitchen. If you have a lot more success in the kitchen, you're going to be willing to go out and want to hunt and eat these more.
Yeah, I love that way you've keyed the book out like that, breaking it down by those 4 sizes, and you've got that sort of got those little icons, at the top of the recipes to tell you what size hog you're talking about. I'm wondering, when I think about game animals, I'm trying to think if there's any other animals that have that kind of variation. I mean, occasionally you get a buck or something or a doe that's real fat, but it's not like we're typically utilizing that fat, for venison. So, it's like that tallowy, waxy fat. So that almost doesn't really have much bearing, and you almost always end up with pretty similar venison once you trim it out. I'm just thinking is there any, it's just so unique with hogs. Is there anything else you can think of that's really like that, where it's so dramatically different from individual to individual? I mean, people, I guess.
Ducks, I would say.
Okay.
Ducks could be one, because then you have species variation.
Yeah.
And then also depending on the part of the country you're in, we like here's a dirty little hunting secret of mine. I've never shot a mallard. I love to duck hunt. We don't get them here.
Okay.
I've seen, I think, 5 once in Central Texas, but we just don't get them. So a relatively large duck with a lot of fat on it is a little bit unheard of around here. Yeah. And once the rice production went away down here, the fatty ducks just kind of don't exist. And so I live in a world of medium ducks, lots and lots of gadwalls, lots of little teal, a few widgeons sprinkled in here and there, and then a lot of shovelers and ringnecks. And so I would say that the next most applicable situation like that, where you have to kind of approach animals individually, would be ducks, because you're not going to roast a ringneck like you would a mallard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to clean up some sea ducks here, and my wife and I were laughing about it because I found the meat of sea ducks to be wonderful, but the fat is
Mm.
the reason that people don't like eating them.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got to really trim all that away. It's orange and it smells like off fish.
Yeah.
And but the meat tastes fantastic. But the first time I cleaned them, I remember my wife and I went to the movies that night. And she would not hold my hand because it stunk so bad. It stunk so bad of fish,
Oh, I love that.
She'll eat the breast meat, but she won't touch my hands after. It's hilarious.
That's really funny.
Yeah, but the first time I shot a big hog, I was in where was I? Georgia? Yeah, near Savannah, Georgia. And we shot a hog that I still don't know what he weighed because the scale exploded when we tried to hang him up. He was a monster. And I have just never been so turned off by an animal. I mean, I came into it with my attitude of reverence, like I wanted to love this guy, but he just had like festering wounds from tusks. He had those mites all over his body. He just stunk so bad. I mean, he truly grossed me out. Like I've just never, he had balls that looked like two footballs. You know what I mean? This guy was disgusting. And so I can understand how some people get exposed to certain hogs and could think that. But then at the same time, I've seen, a lot of hogs in that sort of 80 to, I don't know, 50 to 100 pound range that, man, they're just perfect. They just are perfect, they just look like perfect meat. So, but what's the sort of general sentiment you've had over these years that you've been doing this work? Like what is the sort of general negativity that people have? It's just that they're, when they say they're inedible, what are they talking about usually?
Well, I mean, just to your exact point right there, it's those big boars. And it's like, I'm a bit of an apologist, I was, when it comes to that. And it's a fine line that I have to toe when I speak of the attributes of a big boar, because sometimes they are just plain gross, like you're describing. They can have those wounds, those cysts. They stink to high heaven on the outside, and the meat quality may be pretty rough. I mean, it could be pretty sticky, or it could be fine. I mean, I've eaten plenty of 150-pound plus boars that were totally fine to eat. They had a nice layer of fat on them. You're smoking the ribs, you're roasting, and there's no trace of that gaminess. But that's kind of a crapshoot right there. So those big boars, it's very hard to defend it. And but my approach is that if you want to give it a shot, here's what you do. And there's an illustration again in the book where it's like it's an old school butchery diagram of a big boar, and then there's like all the numbers on the cuts, and every one of those coincides with smoked sausage.
Very smoky sausage.
It's just like, I mean, a highly spiced smoked sausage, and that smoked sausage has brown sugar and juniper and caraway and these other things in there that can tame those flavors somewhat, and it's pretty effective. So if you are interested in keeping that big boar, or even part of it, just pulling the back straps and maybe some meat off the hams or whatever it is, just to retain a little bit, we've got some methods for you. But I do get it. Sometimes it's pretty rank. But for me personally, it's been pretty rare to totally discard an animal.
Yeah. If you're sitting in the blind and you're looking at a sounder come in and it's just mixed males, females, piglets, all different sizes, and you're going to take one, what's the one you're targeting?
The
ideal?
The largest pregnant sow.
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, I'm proud and excited to share that WildFed Season 3 is now airing on Outdoor Channel Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern as part of their Taste of the Wild block. This is our biggest and best season yet, with adventures ranging from coastal Maine all the way to tropical Hawaii. You'll see familiar faces and meet new friends that are dedicated to the pursuit of wild foods. Come along with me for prairie dog hunting in the Dakotas, the iconic alewife run in Maine, gathering and feasting with the foraging world's most renowned expert, Sam Thayer, invasive species hunting on the rugged island of Molokai, and my wife Avani's first hunt too. If you don't have access to the Outdoor Channel on cable, you can watch it live right along with us on Friendly TV. That's FRNDLY TV.com. They have a 7-day free trial, and the monthly cost is just $6.99 a month. We can't wait to share all these new stories with you. Thank you so much for your incredible support. Now, back to the show.
Once they hit sexual maturity at 5 or 6 months, there's just a short gestation period. And then they have a 23-day break after that before they go into estrus again, at which point they're still nursing piglets, and then they'll probably be bred again.
23 days?
Yeah. So female pigs tend to have more fat on them. And tend to be more generally palatable. And I want fat. I want chops and ribs and roasts and things like that. And so in general, yeah, it's a sow. And it's the one, they're either going to be pregnant or nursing, basically. And these are some hard facts, right now.
Yeah.
The ones that are nursing tend to be drawn down, like the one I was talking about earlier that had the piglet. She was super lean. And the ones that are pregnant tend to retain more fat. Now, of course,
they're getting ready for that lactation that's going to start.
Correct. And so you also see a lot of regional variation. We do a lot of hunting in South Texas, and it can be good sometimes as far as fat quality, but overall, I would put it at pretty average. These hogs tend to run quite lean down there, but I live in Central Texas. To the northwest of me is a lot of pecan production coupled with a lot of native oak. And so those hogs look very good.
Yeah.
And then to the east, we have just a wide range of oaks. I believe some counties out there have 5 different oaks out there. And so you've got lots of acorns on the ground. And so during the winter months, these hogs can put on a lot of natural fat and look really good. But sounder rolls in. I'm going to try to identify the most football-looking sow that's in there and take that one. And that's what we orient our clients to as well. We're shooting. They're like, I want to shoot the big one. I'm like, let's talk about this. Let's like.
You like smoked sausage?
Yeah. I'm going to ascertain. My advice to you is to shoot that one on the left that's like really plump. And it's like we're not shooting trophies right now. We're not trying to just like bust the scale. We want a nice eater. And so I would say a large sow, and I've seen some very large sows. I'm not saying just like an 80 pound. I've seen sows that are like over 150, and I will take the biggest one. Like if it is a big, huge fat sow, that's really what I want. More meat, more sausage, and then all that fat, which is just going to make them super delicious.
I got some questions about the fat, and my first, so also came to hunting kind of late in life, a little older than you even, and my first big game hunts were bears, and I kind of came to that just being super interested in the fat. I mean, just to me, bear fat is like, it's gold, man. That's the stuff. And so one thing I've noticed in bear cookery not that I found bear cookery to be that developed of a culinary science, unfortunately. I mean, maybe in some places, but I haven't really tapped into that. So I've been kind of on my own figuring it out over the years. But one thing I've noticed is people tend to trim out a bear and then render the fat and then cook the meat lean. And I don't know why exactly. The fat quality is really nice. I'm wondering with hogs, you cook them fat on, if I understand it. Do you render the fat out? Does it render well? Does it freeze well with the fat? All those kind of questions. Like, talk to me about the fat. I mean, obviously, pork fat in the domesticated stock is like one of the most prized lipids, culinary lipids there is, and you can both use it as lard or leave it on the animal. Of course, everybody loves their bacon. So, but what's the story with wild hog fat, and how do you use it? And do you ever separate it from the meat, or do you typically leave it on?
Yeah, another great question. So let's break it down first into 2 types of fat. So you're going to have that interior fat, the kind of waxy fat, which is known as leaf fat on the inside of the intestinal cavity around the kidneys and the tenderloins. And a hog that has some fat on it should have a fair amount of leaf fat. Now that is typically rendered into lard. And so that's the prized lard. It's a very soft fat. And for things like pastry making, pies and cookies and cakes and tortillas and tamales and so forth. That's the best fat out there because Crisco is formulated to be texturally identical
Right.
to that
Right.
kind of fat.
That's the whole hydrogenation process is
Right.
really about trying to
Right.
make fake lard, right?
Right. And so that's an excellent fat for rendering. And so we will typically render that fat specifically, from wild hogs, for making lard, for making all those other products.
Now
Um,
that fat though that fat's not really associated with a cut anyway, right? So it's sort of like
right,
you can just pull it away anyway. It's not like it's on a piece of meat that you're going to cook
correct.
quite in the way it might be in another body part.
Yeah, and then we remove it by hand. Not even with a knife. Just
Right.
pull it out.
Pull it away.
And then the rest of the fat is going to be this, external fat, mostly along the back from the shoulders all the way to the hams, and that's your back fat or fat back, and it's a firmer fat. And one thing I have discovered with feral hogs is that tends to also run a little bit softer than domestic pork fat. So incorporating that into sausages is a little bit risky because it tends to break. It tends to leach out a little bit more. And so if you made a sausage, let's say you took 100% lean wild hog meat and mixed in 25% wild hog fat, and then you took 100% wild hog lean and mixed that with 25% domestic pork fat and made two different sausages with a really controlled ratio of fat, you would probably have more fat exude from the feral hog fat added sausage. The domestic hog fat tends to just hold a lot better.
Yeah.
It's a textural thing, and when you're making sausage, it's a lot about texture, and so sometimes you can have a little bit of extra fat coming out if you're just using primarily feral hog fat. So for that reason, we will, especially with lean animals, we'll add in domestic pork fat for sausage making. That back fat, it's all over the place. It's a spectrum, and you never know what they've been eating. But I would assume that it is diet that is causing that different fat effect.
Yep.
And then beyond that, so you've got that leaf fat, and you've got that back fat or fat back. I have found too that as it sits in the freezer, over time, it will start to develop more strong flavors. And so the things that you associate with feral hogs, that kind of that muddiness or that gaminess or that kind of assertive porky flavor, over time, over months in the freezer, will start to come out the more fat that's in there. And it'll happen in sausages and it'll happen in roasts. You could have an animal that is like grocery store pork mild, that you make a roast off of it, a shoulder roast in the oven, and it comes out, it's great. And then 7 months later, you come back and you do the other shoulder roast, and it's just got a little bit more of that kind of feral hog twang to it. And it's like, oh, that's interesting because I don't remember that from the first time, but that's that fat sitting in the freezer for a while, and it kind of changes in tone a bit. But it's kind of a trade-off, with having a nice fatty wild animal like the bear. And I'm pretty sure, I don't have any experience with bear, but I'm almost positive that's why people are trimming that off, is because the rancidification process that happens in the freezer.
It's amazing that those processes still happen in the freezer, that level of oxidation in a vacuum seal bag at -6, like that can still happen. But yeah, for years, people have asked me that question about bear meat. Why do you trim it? And I've been like, I don't know. Ranella said that, he mentioned, years ago, I heard him talking about, well, if you leave the fat on over time, that's those kind of gamey flavors will develop. And I haven't actually really tested that out. I've just always separated them. So I end up with this, jars of fat and very lean meat. And I haven't dared to like mess around with that too much, but that is interesting. That would develop in it. So I guess what it leaves me thinking is that as game cooks will never really escape the need for domestic pork fat. It's just always it's just going to be a constant, huh?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
pretty much, unless you just shoot that unicorn of a feral hog
Yeah,
that's got
right.
just the most perfect fat on it. And it
Yeah.
doesn't, I don't know what it comes from because, I mean, I don't know what the ration would be that produces that, the wild ration,
Mhm.
what kind of magical um, crossroads of acorns and
Right.
pecans and grubs and blackberry roots and
Mhm.
probably some corn. We're in Texas, there's feeders everywhere. But I will say that corn, like if they've been hitting corn feeders really hard, their fat is noticeably greasy and weeping at room temperature. It has this very, very soft feature to it where your hands just are slick with it if they've been eating too much corn. And so
Wow.
it's just like, it's almost a cautionary tale right there. It's just
Yeah.
GMO corn is not good for anybody.
That's interesting because that seems to everywhere I've hunted hogs, that's what people are doing is baiting them in with corn
Right.
and some variant. And but it's interesting with corn, you've got all that polyunsaturated fat, and so that fat is I mean, you take some corn oil, you take some olive oil, you put it in the refrigerator, it turns to a gel.
Mm-hmm.
You take some coconut oil, you put it in the fridge, or some lard, turns to gel. You put a bottle of corn oil in the fridge, it stays a liquid because
Mm-hmm.
it's polyunsaturated, right? You have to get it really, really cold to get it to
Mm-hmm.
solidify, versus some fats like a saturated fat locks right up at room temperature. So,
Right.
so the more of that they're eating, it makes sense that that's going to be a real liquidy fat. But yeah, I find all this really interesting, and it seems like in the United States, and I think what's been so cool, you've been really, and I want to talk about in a minute, sort of like how, this idea of getting typecast into this, because I get what you're saying, but you really have been at this pivotal place where it seems like America's having to reckon with the hog issue and figure out some solutions besides just aerial gunning or whatever it is. Kind of like, okay, we'll just do that. And it seems like part of it has been bringing them into this USDA inspections facilities and then actually getting them into the food supply. Interestingly, I was out in Hawaii in the summertime hunting axis deer, and it was cool to see that they have a similar thing going now, where they're getting some USDA inspectors out there. They're running
Mm-hmm.
those axis deer through that, and they're able to get them into the food supply. In fact, I was buying wild axis jerky at the Honolulu airport a couple months ago, which was really cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's neat to see that. But so something similar going on, right? Traps, USDA inspection, and they can go into the food supply. How big is that? Is that growing to the point that it could be significant one day? Like we could actually have a significant amount of these hogs in the food supply, or is this something that you think will always stay kind of marginal?
Well, I think it's a really nuanced question, and I'll start off with kind of an interesting note about that. Is that I can't remember what states it was, but a couple states just a few years back tried to ban hog hunting. Uh, and it's an
Okay.
interesting reason. No, it's a very interesting reason, as they felt that monetizing hogs
Wow.
in any form was going to be
Mhm.
detrimental and would only lead to the proliferation of more hogs. And they're
Sure.
probably right in a way.
Hmm.
And as I will be told by any biologist here in Texas, we're not going to eat our way out of this problem. And I have come to grips with that. I will freely admit that we're not able to just like fire up the smoker and end feral hogs.
Right.
So my stated role in this is, if you have a dead hog in front of you and you want to eat it, I'm here to help. Um,
Okay.
but but also I think the overarching goal of wildlife management, uh, not associations, but like state management groups is to kill them all, and
Mhm.
they don't want to monetize it in any way.
Yeah.
These agencies are just like, no, no, we want them dead. And then when we do attach some value to them, we get into this real tricky kind of gray area where I have their full support, but at the same time, we don't want eating them to get so out of hand that people are like, oh, I should raise feral hogs, which is an ironic statement because then
Yeah.
you're just raising domestic hogs. I mean, the only difference between a domestic pig and a feral pig is what side of the fence it's on. Like
Yeah.
we
Literally, right?
have quite literally shot feral hogs that have ear tags. They were escaped, but
Yeah.
fair game. Sorry, they are
Yeah.
on the wrong side of the fence. It happens every once in a while. We'll have a sow escape from the domestic pens on the ranch that we're at. because it's also a domestic hog operation.
Mm-hmm.
One will get out, and then a year later, she rolls in and we shoot her and we're like, oh, hey, that's got an ear tag. And that's also a 300-pound sow.
Right.
And so fair game, so it's a really tricky thing.
Also, I imagine one issue would be, and I've heard the rumors, I have friends who go down to Florida to hunt feral hogs, and I'll hear rumors about people importing genetics, trying to beef up because now these outfitters are relying on hunters coming in. They've got their feeders out. And so you could end up with a situation where people are almost intentionally increasing the population of hogs so that their hunts go really well.
Certainly.
So, I imagine that would be an issue.
Here, that'll happen behind high fences. So you'll have a high fence operation that is bringing in trapped hogs from other ranches and then letting them go. And then they have very high success rates for their hunters. Yeah. And I mean, for me, I have absolutely no problem with that, with one caveat. How's your fence?
Yeah.
Like once there's a hole in the fence, then you are 100% adding to that problem. And there could be a real issue.
Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park quote here.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So it's like, we have pretty stringent regulations here about how long you can keep a hog without transporting it to a certified facility, like one of these high fence operations that's, doing everything correctly, or a processor that's going to kill that pig. But it's going to take smarter people than me to figure out how to get a hold of this problem. And it's probably going to be a nuanced and like multi-dimensional approach between putting some in the food supply, killing a lot, and then figuring out how to kill more, because we are not getting in front of them. I think we need to kill 60 to 70% a year in order to keep their numbers static where they're at right now. And that's not happening through hunting.
Yeah. Is that even possible? I mean, how would you do it?
Helicopter hunting and trapping. Trapping is hands down the most effective way in modern trapping, and trapping technology is advancing rapidly. I mean, you think that 15 years ago, the standard box trap, which is just like a large have a heart, essentially. Okay. It's like a
catch one or two in there.
5. Yeah. But the other 7 that weren't caught are never going near that trap again.
Trap shy now.
What's interesting is that you just don't even see those things for sale anymore. I mean, a little bit, but I mean, to think that an animal in 15 years has developed this acumen around traps, where it's like they, as a population, that they just don't even really go near them. I mean, of course, if on a new property with a new population of pigs, you might be able to take out a few with those style traps. But now it's all about the bigger pin traps with the cell phone cameras and the other trap technology, pig brig and nets and things like that. All these other new traps that catch the whole sounder. And that's key, is because these animals are so smart. So I think it goes back to your original question, is just like, what are we going to do? And it's like, trapping, I think, is the most effective. Helicopter hunting can be devastating to pig populations if you have a set area that you need to get pigs out of, for the time being. I mean, you can go up in a helicopter and kill dozens of them. And I'm not judging that at all. If you wanted to land, if you saw, there's a big sow down there, and you land the helicopter and pull the back straps off, then that's cool. But I mean, the
biomass is so significant, right?
I have, I'm not a farmer, and I don't have to deal with the devastation that they wreak upon these agricultural areas, So I don't have the same, skin in the game as other people, so I'm not judging that. If you want to just kill them and leave them lay, I personally, just like, but you could make pancetta. But I get it. But like I said, we're not going to eat our way out of this problem. Yeah. But I think it's definitely an aspect, and every dead one that's on the ground has then become a resource, and let's figure out something to do with it. And there's also a lot of really exciting things, like, can we feed people that don't have enough access to protein?
Right.
There's
you're talking about bodybuilders, right? It's 2 grams a day per pound. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah. There we go.
No, I'm joking. I get what you mean. I mean, this is a lot of biomass. We're talking about a lot of protein.
Yeah.
And people who really need it. Yeah, the aerial gunning things, I get such a mixed feeling about this. I was talking to somebody yesterday. We're setting up an episode for the 4th season of our show about snakeheads over on the Eastern Seaboard. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about how there's it's becoming a commercial, I mean, it's becoming a recreational fishery because they're an exciting fish to fish for, but then there's people who don't want that to happen because they're so angry about them being invasive. And this person was saying to me something like, sometimes I feel with an invasive species that sometimes what people want is like a license to take out all their aggression on an enemy, kind of, you know? So I like shooting ARs. I like training with, you know, I like tactical training a lot. I love that style of shooting. I appreciate it completely. The idea of going up in helicopters and shooting is like super cool. But then at the same time, I see what ends up happening is like, the energy somebody takes to it sometimes looks a little bit aggro and unhealthy. Yeah. And it's like a chance to go kill the enemy, you know, which is like, I just get a little bit of a mixed feeling about that, where that's coming from. But that said, I don't think that the impact is negative on the landscape. It's like you keep indicating, these hogs are a huge problem. It's just like, is this like a healthy direction for us to go? At the same time, maybe that's just necessary. And hey, you know, these people get their thrills and we knock some hogs back. But it's like, I just don't like turning an animal that's invasive because of something we did into an enemy, even though I understand why we do it. So it's this like mixed thing that I feel, you know. I mean, I'm just curious how all that lands for you.
Certainly. I mean, it's a video game. And I've often compared hogs to Nazis and zombies.
Yeah,
like,
right.
You know, like any movie, it's okay to kill as many Nazis and zombies as you want.
Yes,
and once we're like, hey, everybody, you guys need to kill some hogs. And some people were perked up and they're like, say what? You know, like, you mean all of them in any way? You know, shoot them in the guts, you know, shoot them from a helicopter, from a hot air balloon. That's legal in Texas.
Yeah.
And so,
wow. Well, a little more stable of a platform than a helicopter, actually.
Yeah. I can't even imagine
to shoot from.
You know, some Chardonnay in one hand, a picnic basket. And then, you know, oh, there's one. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, it's hard to define what, you know, people have in their hearts when they're up there shooting the pigs. But, you know, you're absolutely right. And I had an opportunity to go up in a helicopter for free once, and I was just like, you know, I'm good. And I mean, you guys go and have all your fun. It's great. That ranch actually went out of their way to go pick up the hogs, process them, and they would take them into town. And it was a small, you know, South Texas town, and they'd take them into town and give them away. And I was like, oh, that's cool. This is a great operation. I personally don't want to go up there and just start banging away at pigs, but that's just me, you know. And it's like, I don't care what everybody else does, you know. That's totally cool, and I get it as a control. But you're right. I mean, people are pretty gleeful about it, and it's like, oh, it's to help the farmers, and I'm like, well, why don't you go to the farmers market? That helps farmers a lot too. You know, exactly. Like, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that help farmers. You know, like you know, get
it's
more.
Like seeing people. Have you seen people like on the they're on water skis with a helmet and melee weapons taking out carp when they jump, you know? I don't know if you've seen any of that. Oh yeah, they're pulling dudes on water skis. These guys have like a bat with like spikes coming off it, and they're wearing like, you know, like a lacrosse mask or something. And as the fish, you've seen that, I'm sure, where they're just jumping out of the water and they're just trying to smash them in the air, or swords, or, you know, all kinds of stuff like that, where you're like, yeah, I mean, okay, but like, at what point is it gratuitous? I don't know. I mean, again,
at that point, I think we could say it at that point.
It's exactly. It's like those, you know. It's like I went to this CrossFit gym in Hawaii recently, and their logo is it's like a woman riding a great white shark away from an exploding volcano. It's like, you know, it's just like over the top, or like those pictures you see of Trump back in the day, where he's like riding a bear, you know, and it's like, it's like, okay, like we're getting a little out of control here, but anyway, the scale of the issue is obviously significant. Hey man, changing gears, talk to me about some of the other things that you like to do, you're interested in. Because like you said, getting typecast as the hog guy probably was not the long-term play, but certainly seems to have been beneficial to you and the rest of the hunting community. Again, I can't say enough good things about your book. I wish the hunting literature and the wild food literature and the, we're at that crossroads in the cooking literature, like where all that stuff intersects. I wish there was more stuff like this. I think you did something really, really unique and special here, and kind of spared no expense in that the quality of the book and the hardcover and the hand of the cover of it. I mean, this texture you got on it, it's beautiful, right? But now you're the hog guy. So like, what else,
Right.
what else is out there for you?
Well, thank you. That's kind, and I don't mind being the hog guy. It's fine. It's a really good pressing issue. And it's also a gateway for a lot of new hunters. And I live in Texas. It has an extremely nuanced hunting situation here. There's a
Very
lot of
unique.
barriers to entry, but also a lot of very well stewarded land. We live in probably the most unique state as far as hunting and land access goes in the country, from my perspective. And I don't think that it's all bad. I think there's a lot of great things about it. But
Really
going to that, the role that hogs can play in access, especially for new hunters. And I think that's really what I'm most excited about right now. And it's grown over the years, with our program. We're about to enter into I don't even remember if it's our 13th or 14th season of doing the hunting the hunting classes. And it's new hunters. I love new hunters. I like taking kids. I like taking people that have never had access to hunting before, for whatever reason that is. Maybe their grandparents, didn't hunt. Their parents didn't hunt. They come from a demographic that's not a traditional hunting demographic, or whatever that is. I think that it's really fascinating, and for me, just extremely fun and rewarding to get people out there, even if it's the only time they ever do it. I think that it gives people an incredible perspective. Maybe we have the opportunity to fill their freezer with a deer or a hog, and then they learn about how to safely handle a firearm, and maybe learn a different perspective on owning a firearm. I think that they can learn a lot of really interesting perspectives on food and other resources, things like that. But I think that right now, that's the thing that I find the most exciting. And I'm enjoying working with a lot of different agencies and groups here, from governmental agencies to non-governmental agencies, that are very focused on recruitment. And right now, I feel like, we can use, as a restaurant and a hunting program and the book and all the other things that have come from that, any notoriety that we can take from that and transfer into recruitment is really important, because I feel like we just need more conservation partners out there from all walks of life. I want everybody to be involved and care about wild places and care about wild food. And I think it's a really good way, and it's good work, and you meet great people. And I get I have the best job in the world, sitting next to somebody when they shoot their first deer. And it's just like and I've done it many, many times, and I hope that I get to do it many, many more times. So right now, I think that's really what I'm kind of focusing on and excited about. I also just discovered that I love writing books.
That's cool.
I enjoy that as a medium. I realize that, I don't like I don't like phone calls. I like texts. I realize that, like once you get older, you start to realize like all these things, like stop being so critical of yourself. I'm like, I love text. It's great.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, and that probably makes sense. I like to write. I have no formal education at all, but I enjoy writing. And so I'm going to continue on with that path as well. I can't, unfortunately, disclose, but I've got another book project in the works.
Awesome.
And hopefully about a year from now we'll be releasing that. So there's that. I enjoy that, but moreover, I just think it's education. I think it's great. I love learning from clients. I love learning from people, learning from you. It's just like. And then just taking that and giving that back out, because there's no use in holding all this information in, especially now, we're at a real interesting Time, enough said, right?
Yeah. I think,
Yeah. And it's very important that young people and everybody kind of gets on board with just where their food comes from. And I'll do that in any way I can. If it comes from supporting a farmer or killing a hog or just trying to, take the message of hunting and foraging and fishing out there. And so, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And it's it's nice to be more big picture about it. In the past, you know, having a restaurant, you get bogged down in the details, and it's just always these daily things. And it's nice to finally get to a point where it's like, hey, what I really love doing is the educational aspect of it, and then make it so.
Yeah. Who's like the average person coming to one of your classes now and to learn to hunt? And has that changed in the 13 years? I'm assuming it probably has quite a bit.
It's changed drastically. In the beginning, I'd say mostly people from Texas, mostly a kind of a mix of young urban people and older experienced hunters. And the younger people maybe had never hunted before. So in the past, it would be very common for us to have kind of a 50-50 mix of people who had never hunted in their lives and people that had hunted their whole lives. And the people that had not hunted were there for obviously the entire package: sighting in, hunting, butchering, processing, cooking, all of that. And then the experienced hunters, the ones that are just like, I don't really care if I get a deer. They're like, I can go shoot a deer next week. I'm here for the butchery and the cooking and learning new perspectives on that, both of which I enjoy very much, because also your experienced hunters bring a lot to the table as far as what we learn, and so it's just, I think there's a constant give and take, any kind of education like that. Anybody that's been hunting their whole lives has something to offer us as teachers as well. And so for many years, we kind of rode kind of that stat right there, about 50-50. And then as the program started to get more notoriety, we started to get more out of state people. And so that's changed drastically. We used to have maybe, we have 6 students on a typical hunt. We would have 5 people from Texas and maybe 1 person from out of state. And now it's not uncommon to have 1 person from Texas.
Oh, wow.
And 5 people from California. Or somewhere else potentially, but it's kind of crazy, when you have just, and it's all individuals. I remember the first class of this season, people started showing up. Where are you from? They're like, I'm from Santa, fill in the blank. And it was just really funny, and a lot of California, but all over the States. So, but a lot of people traveling in now, not only to experience the program, but hunting in Texas, because it's like, we're on it's a low fenced ranch, but it's a large ranch in South Texas. And we have prolific game down there. We have a huge deer population, very healthy deer population. And so people come to experience that as well, along with the butchery and the cooking, because it's a fairly unique program. There's other programs that are popping up very similar to ours, which is awesome, because we can't even begin to take in all the people that want to come. And so anywhere from, your like more well-priced or cheaper options through government agencies, all the way through other just private enterprises that are doing similar things. And I think it's a great thing, because everybody's getting out there and educating and exposing people to that.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch in the last few years as well. You've been on Rogan's show, and obviously his demographic is a pretty mixed bag. I think it's not, you do like Ranella's show, but like, I'd say his demographic's a little bit more focused. And then, Rogan's got such a big, broad audience that I imagine a lot of people who never thought they would get exposed to hunting at all get exposed to it. And then, you start to draw in these characters that otherwise never would really ever approach hunting. I mean, that's just fascinating to me. But it's at this time where, wow, if we don't start to bring hunters in, I sometimes I'm amazed, because I'll hear people say like, oh, we got too many hunters. We got to, people who are resistant to this recruitment. But it's like, if we don't do this, there's going to be no dollars left in the coffers for
Yeah.
conservation, So it seems really crucial that we bring people in from all these different walks of life now, and getting some of these bigger platforms to talk about what you're doing is awesome,
Yeah. And the situation in Wyoming is different than the situation in Texas, and it's too many hunters in Wyoming is way different than a perceived too many hunters in Texas. And it all has to do with these nuanced issues between the states. And, it's like, I think it's wonderful that there's so much public land in Wyoming. I also think it's wonderful that there's so much private land in Texas, in a way, but I'm not saying there's not a problem with it, because if there was a way that we could have these access initiatives on private land here, then I think that we could really start to solve some problems. And of course, we have to make that attractive to landowners, to allow people onto their land. But I think that, these are goals that we can have, absolutely, and we can strive towards. But too many hunters, I don't know about that. I don't know about that, because and the last thing I want to do is gatekeep. I came to this later in life, and I'm not the last person that gets let in.
Yeah.
And
a lot of boomer hunters are going to age out pretty fast here, and it's going to leave a pretty big vacuum. And I think sometimes it looks like there's so many people coming in, but it's not like they all stick to it.
Right.
And just these dollars are so crucial, right?
Well, especially here. I mean, that's another thing, is like we have a lot of people come to the program, and then, on the last day we're like, hey, this is great. And then come up and they're like, what do I do now? And I'm like, well, you have to be clever. There's a lot. I mean, you can pay for it, or you can beg for it, or you can make friends. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's different. You can't just pull over on the side of the road and start hunting here. And so, I mean, you can, but I would not recommend it.
You might become the hunted.
Yeah. So, there's those issues, but all told, I look at those issues as exciting and surmountable things that we can just overcome.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Any hunts coming up for you? Anything interesting you got on the horizon?
Yeah, it's about to be turkey season.
Yeah,
the flowers are blooming, the trees are budding.
Man, it's funny you say that, because I just got back from snowshoeing with my dogs this morning. It's snowing right now, so we're not even close.
85 degrees here today. It's been a warm one, and the pecans are starting to leaf out, so I think that we've hit our last freeze. It was a pretty mild winter for us, except for obviously the terrible ice storm that damaged 10.5 million trees in the Austin area.
Wow.
Devastating.
Oh, just in Austin. Wow.
Devastating. I mean, you drive out around here, and it's just like these trees have just taken a beating. Many of them dead, and we'll be paying for that for years. But anyway, also it is prime fishing season. I'm proudly boatless, and so I got to walk it in. And so this is when the crappie and the white bass start running.
Yeah.
And since I was a kid, that is the most exciting time of year for me. And I've been so busy, I haven't been able to go, but hoping to get out in the next few days and just walk through a field of bluebonnets and catch a couple fat crappie. And that's like nothing like it.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it. It's pretty good.
That's awesome to hear, man. I feel similarly. Like, there's certain things I like doing here that it's like like walking through the mountains, catching brook trout in Maine is like retirement plan. It's like, I love going out in big water. I got to do some swordfish fishing this year and stuff like that. It was awesome. But at the end of the day, just like walking through my woods barefoot, like catching little fish is pretty exciting to me. And good luck on your turkey season, man. I mean, it's just my favorite time of year too. I got my wife into turkey hunting last year. Finally, she came out with me. And so now she's quite eager to get back out this spring. So I'm pretty excited about it too.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Well, hey man, thank you for your time today. Thanks for your contribution to the hunting and wild food world. Your restaurant's awesome, by the way. I got to eat there and was really impressed. Really like the kind of open concept of the kitchen and the fire and all that. It's just great. And really enjoyed that. Of course, love your book. Just love what you're doing, man. So thanks so much for your work.
Oh, well, that means a lot. I love talking to you, and whenever you're down here, I would be personally hurt if you didn't get in touch with me.
Right on.
All right.
Cool, man. Well, I'll be in touch soon then. Thanks, Jesse.
All right. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a podcast guest or topic suggestion, or maybe a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host the WildFed TV show for? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 or 2 of the WildFed TV show, go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 20 episodes. Season 3 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2023. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed shirts, hoodies, hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.